So, we have Chandogya Upanishad. We are starting from 5.3.1 and we'll take a few verses thereafter. So, once Svetaketu, the grandson of Aruna, came to the assembly of the Panchalas. Pravahana, the son of Jivala, enquired of him, "My boy, has your father instructed you?" He said, Svetaketu that is. Svetaketu said, "He has indeed, sir." So now these princes ask him a few questions. He has come to the royal assembly of the Panchalas, and now they are testing him with a few questions. "Do you know where the created beings go above from here?" "No, revered sir." "Do you know the place of parting of the two paths, the path of the gods and the path of the fathers?" "No, revered sir." "Do you know why the other world is not filled up?" "No, revered sir." "Do you know how, at the fifth oblation, the liquid oblations, or the unseen results of action, come to be designated as man?" "No, indeed, revered sir." "Then why did you say, 'I have been instructed'?" "Because how can he who does not know these things say, 'I have been instructed'?" So Svetaketu was distressed, and he came to his father's place and said to him, "Revered sir, without having instructed me properly, you said, 'I have instructed you.'" That nominal Kshatriya asked me 5 questions and I was unable to answer even one of them. The father said, "Even as you have spoken to me about them, so I do not know even one of them. Had I known them, why should I have not told you?" So then the father, Gautam, went to the king's place. When he arrived, the king made reverential offerings to him. In the morning, he presented himself to the king when he was in the assembly. The king said to him, "O revered Gautam, please ask for a boon of human wealth." He replied, "O king, let the human wealth remain with you. Tell me those words which you spoke to my boy." The king was perturbed. The king commanded him, "Stay here for a long time." At the end of the period, he said to him, "Even as you told me, O Gautam, prior to you, this knowledge never went to the Brahmins. This is why the expounding of this knowledge belonged to the Kshatriyas in earlier times in all the worlds." And then he instructed him. All right. See what is happening. Let's try to understand. In the spiritual domain, in the spiritual literature, you will come across two types. One is that which contains knowledge of the type that gets old, knowledge that gets old and outdated. So that consists of ideas, principles, concepts, speculations, imaginations. These are things that are limited by the human condition at a particular place, at a particular time. You know only so much, and what you know is determined by where you are, who you are, how old you are, who surround you, how you have been educated, what is the level of accumulated knowledge in your society, those things. And as time marches on, you find that in general you are accumulating more knowledge, better knowledge, more refined knowledge, and the stuff that you had in earlier times is no longer relevant. Hmm? And knowledge of this kind abounds the spiritual books. Hmm? That part has to be put in its place. That part has to be seen as time bound, not timeless, not something that will bring you to liberation, but still of interest, because it gives you a peek into the mind of the enquirer and the conditions of the times when the scripture was composed. This differentiation is very important. If this differentiation is not made, if literatures of these two kinds are not seen as different, fundamentally different from each other, then there is a lot of problem. Stuff that is of time-bound nature must be of interest to us only to the extent it helps us know the prevailing conditions of those times. So there is a historical importance. You come to know what those people used to believe in, what their concepts were, how they were limited, how the society was organized, and many other interesting things. Like you study in history or archaeology, museums are important, are they not? And there is a beauty that you perceive then when you visit a museum. So the time-bound parts of scriptures indeed do have beauty, but that beauty has only a historical, or you could say archaeological significance. When I'm talking of archaeology, I'm talking of it in the subtle sense. You could say in the psychological sense. Now, there are these questions that Svetaketu is asked. So, what are those questions? Do you know the place of the parting of the two paths, the paths of the gods and the paths of the fathers? The fact is that absolutely, truly, there are no such two paths. That these paths exist is the belief of those times. So, importance does not lie at the level of knowledge. These princes that Svetaketu has gone to, they are testing him in knowledge. Have you been told of the path of gods, of the path of the fathers? Svetaketu says, no, I do not know. Similarly, and they are asking him, do you know why the other world is not filled up? It would be a great mistake if you start thinking that Chandogya Upanishad is about some other world and it's filling up. No. This story is not there to instruct you about the other world or the path of gods or the path of fathers. These are mere beliefs of those times. And these beliefs are not at all central to the Upanishads. Here it has been mentioned in the passing. The emphasis of Upanishads is on understanding reality as it is and being liberated from it. Upanishads do not stand for cultivating beliefs about this world or the other world. Similarly, the question, do you know how at the fifth oblation, the liquid oblations come to be designated as man? Fourth oblation, fifth oblation, seventh oblation. they carry no spiritual significance at all. Similarly, the liquid oblations do not come to be designated as man. Even that is either a euphemism, a metaphor of some kind, or a mere belief that has been outdated beyond any kind of acceptability today. So these questions are asked to him, and in some sense his current knowledge, his general knowledge is being checked, and Svetaketu honestly says, I do not know any of these things. So they say, if you do not know these things, then how come you say that you have been instructed? So he goes back and he says, Father, you have instructed me, I do not know these things. I went there and I had to face this humiliation. They asked me these questions, I had no answers, and they said, you claim you are instructed, you do not know anything. The father says, son, had I known of these things, I would have instructed you. Even I do not know of these things. So then the father goes to the king and says, King, tell me about the stuff that you spoke to my son. The king says, well, you can take a lot of wealth. He says, I do not need your wealth. You tell me of the stuff that you spoke to my son. Now, this is what is timeless. This is what is important. And you must gather the distinction. See, today it is of no significance. All this talk about the path of gods, path of fathers, fifth oblation, liquid oblation, this, that, no significance. All that has gone. All that has changed. Nobody has those questions today. But what is it that has remained unchanged since the Chandogya Upanishad till today? What is it that has not changed? Human relationships. People will have sons, and people must know how to raise sons. And people will have ignorance. They must know how to deal with their ignorance. And people will look at the world, and the world is full of stuff, and people must know how to deal with that stuff. So what has not changed is that the human being is always in relationship. The human being is always related. The given excerpt here allows us rich insights into at least three kinds of relationships. The first relationship is between the boy and his father. The second relationship is between a person and his ignorance. The third relationship is between a person and worldly wealth. That's what is to be learned from this. Those relationships existed then and exist even today. So that part of the Upanishad is relevant to us. The other part is outdated and we are not interested. We do not want to know about the oblations and this and that. We know where man comes from. In the material sense, today we know much more about the birth of man, about material processes, about human anatomy, about the fetus, about the embryo. We know a lot more than was known in the Vedic times. So when it comes to worldly knowledge, it's not the Vedas we have to look to. They'll not be able to offer much to us. However, they offer us tremendously rich stuff when it comes to the internal world. Are you getting it? Because the internal world has not changed. It cannot change. Every child even today is born at the same place, in the same psychological place. It was born 3,000 years ago. It is not born in the same worldly place. When the child is born, it is born in two worlds. One, the internal world. Second, the external world. The external world has changed beyond recognition. 3,000 years ago, the child was born and all he sensed around himself was a lot of ignorance, poverty, this and that. The economic conditions were different. The social conditions were different. Those things were there. Today, when the child is born, externally he perceives very, very different conditions. But internally, that child 3,000 years back and today are born in the same place. Exactly the same place. So it's the internal station that is more important, and it is the internal station that the Upanishads address. Internal station consists of relationships as well. That's what is being addressed here. So what is it that I find interesting in the excerpt taken today. First, the fact that the father is also the teacher. And the father is made responsible to educate the kid in stuff that is really important. So when he is asked, Svetaketu, have you been instructed? He says, yes. By whom? By your father. It's the father who knows that merely giving physical birth to the child is not enough. I have to act as someone who educates him well, deeply. Otherwise, I would have done great injustice to give body to the kid and not relieve the kid of bodily identification. Is kind of cruelty, is it not? What have you given the kid? Bodily identification, a lot of hardships. That's what you have given to the kid by giving birth to him. Now, since you have done this, now you are indebted. You owe to provide liberation to your child. That's something you owe the child. Else you have harmed him. Really, to just give birth is to just give harm. So if you are giving the body to the child, it is extremely important that you do not fail in your role to give freedom from bodily identification to the child. And that's the role Svetaketu's father has taken upon himself. Then this passage offers valuable insight into the kind of society that is there. He goes to some place. They are not really assessing him on his wealth or pedigree or other things. And he is going to a Kshatriya assembly. And Kshatriyas are not really supposed to be very serious about knowledge. They are supposed to be serious about worldly acquisitions, victories, wealth, power, these things. But such was the society that even the royals were more interested in knowledge. So much so that at one point the king says there was special knowledge. It was the privilege of Kshatriyas and never known to Brahmins, but now that you have come to request, I'll share it with you. So even the kings were very interested in knowledge. And that's the lesson that you learn from this passage. Irrespective of what you do in life, your primary interest, your central love has to be knowledge. So he goes there, and the sons of the king, they are asking him about, what do you know? Where do you come from? They are not inviting him for some fun, frolic entertainment. Come, let's go hunt something, or let's talk about riches. Now that you have come to us, we'll show you our beautiful gardens, our magnificent palaces. None of that. And these are mere boys. And the boys are discussing top kind of scriptural stuff. And then they ask him, do you know this? Do you know that? And what do we see Svetaketu responding as? He does not know. He candidly admits, no, I do not know. No beating about the bush. Direct answers, no, I do not know. And when he does not know, they say, if you have not known, then you must not call yourself instructed. You need to do better. You need to know more. And the fellow comes back and asks the father. He said, well, you said that you have taught me, but if you have taught me, why have you not taught me these things? Father does not say, well, these things still remain. And when you will be eligible, I'll teach them to you. Look at the commitment to truth in this relationship. The father says, I have not taught these things to you because I do not know these things. Had I known, I would have taught them. The father is so honest in admitting. And then what does the father do? Now that the son has raised this question, the father cannot let it go lightly. The father takes it upon himself to learn. And the father goes to the king. What does the king do? The king says, all right, revered Brahmin, you have come to me. Tell me, what in the world do you need? Ask me for wealth. He says, you keep the wealth to yourself. You tell me of the stuff that you spoke to my boy. Again, deep insight into the mind that leads to the Upanishads. When you have a mind like this, when you have social conditions like these, that's when the Upanishads result. The king is offering money. The father is saying, I don't need money, I need knowledge. I'm accountable to my child. I'm accountable to myself as well, because I told my child, when I will know, I will teach you. Had I known, I would have taught you. So my prime responsibility is to know, not to accumulate or gather. I'm obliged not so much to be rich, but to be knowledgeable. So, this is the process of Vedanta, and it is the process that is important. The process that is important. If you can have that process, then Vedanta is an unending stream. You will have Upanishads today as well. And that process must continue even today, because the things that you are seeing in this excerpt fundamentally, internally continue even today. Don't people have boys today? If people have boys today, by boys I mean kids, boys and girls both. If people have kids today, then they are responsible to educate them in the inner sense. Not just the education the kids get in schools, but real inner life education. And when you are teaching that stuff to your kids, then you must tell the kids that it is not the knowledge that I'm giving you is important, but your honesty towards knowledge. It is a good thing to know, but it is a higher thing to admit when you do not know. If you know, but you do not know to confess your ignorance when you face it, then all your knowledge is worthless. So even if Svetaketu couldn't answer the questions of the royals, he still didn't miserably fail. He passed the test of honesty. All right, I do not know at the level of knowledge what you are asking me. But one thing I know for sure, when I do not know, I must admit. I will admit I do not know, and I'll go back to father and ask him, why didn't you teach me this stuff? And father says, all right, I couldn't teach you this stuff, but let me at least not fail in teaching you honesty. Being the son, if you could admit to the princess that you do not know, being the father, how can I fail in admitting to you that I do not know? If Svetaketu does well, the father does better. Because it is easier sometimes to acknowledge your ignorance in front of outsiders, but very difficult to acknowledge your ignorance in front of your own family members, especially your sons and daughters. So the father does that, and the father does not stop there. The father then wants to redress his ignorance. So he goes to the king. And the king is saying, "You're a top scholar, you have come to me. Tell me, how do I serve you? What goods do you need?" He says, "No goods needed. Something far more important. Tell me of the stuff you were speaking to, my boy." And the king says, "Now that you have asked for it, I'll share it with you. I'll educate you in that." Now, what the king tells the Brahmin, I repeat, is not of much practical utility today. But these attitudes are very important. The process that leads to the generation of true knowledge, that is very important. And that process cannot change. That process is timeless. The output of that process might be time dependent, but the process has to be timeless. Inquiry is not something that can belong to one particular age and gets irrelevant in another age. People had to be inquisitive then, people have to be inquisitive today. And if you're not inquisitive towards your inner condition, you may never come to know how bad the inner condition really is. And that is where we are actually doing far worse than the ancients. The ancients, to be truthful, did not really have great outer and material conditions. There is no need to glamorize the worldly, tangible conditions of those times. And they cannot be faulted for that. Because knowledge is an accumulative process. One generation builds upon the knowledge of the other generation. Today, if you have so much science and technology, that does not prove that this generation is especially brilliant or outstanding. It merely means that this generation stands at the receiving end of hundreds of previous generations. You have received all their accumulated knowledge and you are enjoying that. They were the ones who were not at the receiving end of knowledge generated by several previous generations. Man's consciousness was just opening up. Knowledge was just beginning to be generated, unlike today. Unlike today, when we are luckily the inheritors of so much that our predecessors have already done, known, and struggled for. So, they did not really have great material conditions, but they had great internal conditions. And that great internal condition is what we need to learn from them today, because we have great in terms of material wealth and prosperity and all. Great external conditions, but pathetic internal condition. Now let's not make the blunder of learning external things from them. There they really do not have much to teach. It's a double whammy. Where they really have much to teach, there we do not want to learn from them. The internal stuff we do not want to learn from them. Externally, where they really never had much, there we want to glamorize what they had. Needlessly, artificially, falsely make things up. And we want to claim that they knew nuclear energy, that they had all kinds of science and technology. They had none of that. If you want to learn science and technology from them, you will fail, because they never had much science and technology to offer. I'm sure that this would hurt a lot of people who want to entertain them with the belief that all the knowledge was already there with the ancients. No, it was not. But they had something, I'm saying, far, far more important than material knowledge. And that is what you need to learn from them. Are we getting it? Learn the right thing from the right person. You cannot go to the Vedas and try to learn science and technology. They were not written to teach you science. But followers of religious sects take great pride in declaring that all the scientific knowledge is already contained in our holy book, which is a lot of nonsense. This claim holds no ground. But the right scripture has something else, and that something else will never become outdated. That something else is the juice of life. That something else will always remain supremely important. And that is understanding of the mind, the purpose of life, the right view towards life. And that is why, and that is, I find this particular excerpt from Chandogya very meaningful. If you start getting into the content of the knowledge that the royals had and grilled Svetaketu on, you will not find much there. Maybe some symbolic meaning can be there, but even the symbolism you will find too far-fetched. But the other thing is very important. Look at the relationship between the father and the son, between the father and the king, between the individual and knowledge, between the individual and ignorance. That's what you need to learn from here. Learn the right things from the Upanishads. Know what to take from where. History is to be learned from history books. If you go to the Upanishads and start looking for history, you will come up with all kinds of distorted conclusions. Medicine is not something you can learn, for example, from a history book. A spiritual text is that which concerns itself with self-knowledge. That is defining characteristic, not all the other things. The other things can be kept aside. They may have some relevance, but no spiritual dimension whatsoever. Yes, questions?